Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and today's guest has written one of the most compelling and emotionally turbulent books I've ever read. Her book is entitled Castaway Mountain, Love and Loss Among the Wastepickers of Mumbai, and it opens our eyes to a little-known community of over 1,000 people living on the outskirts of Mumbai, India, at the edge of the massive Deonar garbage mountains. These people, living in small shacks and tents, are trash pickers. They make their living by foraging through this massive dump filled with torn rags, plastic, broken glass, crushed cans, and even toxic waste, looking for anything they can sell so they can live another day. This nonfiction book is a deeply moving love story with unforgettable characters set against the backdrop of this real-life harrowing world in India of excruciating poverty and squalor in the shadow of enormous wealth. I'm pleased to welcome author, journalist, and activist Saumya Roy. Saumya, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure to be with you.
Saumya, I must tell you that your book is an absolute revelation, and it left me completely dumbfounded. Can you tell us how you first discovered this community living at the base of the Deonar garbage mountain?
Sure. I was a journalist for many years, for a while in the US, then in India. Then I came, and in 2010, I left to start a nonprofit because I used to write about financial inclusion. And I left in 2010 to start a nonprofit, and we worked in microfinance. And in 2013, we began getting waste pickers from Deonar in our office asking for loans. And it was very clear that that they were different from any other borrowers we'd had before. They had cuts, they had bruises, their walk was bent. And I became immediately this dark fascination that I had for them, because I would ask them that you can only pick what you can with your hands. What are you going to do with our loans? And they would make this seem like a place of great opportunity. There's this quote in the book where this woman told me the very first time, like, do you think trash is ever going to reduce? Like, never. We are in the great sunrise industry of this world, picking trash. And so I said, well, take me there, show me what you do, show me your house, show me your life. And it became increasingly clear to me that while I do visit many slums, this was unlike any other, because while they were making some money, it was as if the mountains and their lives were intertwined. They were living on them. The mountains were in their house. They were on the mountains. The mountains were cutting them, bruising them, and yet their houses were made of trash. They were eating what they found there. They were wearing what they found there, foraging for a treasure that may have been lost in the city. And it became clear to me that through the two of them, which is the waste pickers and the garbage mountains, the story was about us. Because we made this place. We made these mountains. People like us who were sending trash out only to be invisible in this corner were making this place and were making these lives.
The Deonar landfill site was created in 1897 and stretches over 320 acres. I'm told the life expectancy of the people living there is 39 years old because of all the illnesses they get, and the fires and the accidents and the territorial gang disputes. How did it come to this, that so many people are so trapped in that terrible place that they can't find a better way to live?
Where else would they go? I think it's we hear about shining modern India. This is a time of great economic growth and boom. And yet there is no place in the city and in India's modern economy for people like this. It's not like they can work in a call center. They can see it from the garbage mountains, but they cannot work there because they don't have a great education. They don't have they don't know English, they don't have nice clothes. So they don't have opportunities to work in that modern India that we know of. Like one of the waste pickers told me that he tried to get a job as a driver for one of those new taxi services. And so he made it through all the tests until they realized that he couldn't follow directions on GPS because he couldn't read and write. So if someone was calling him, he couldn't read the instructions. And he was so crushed and embarrassed that he couldn't get that job. And so I would say that it's a sign of the lack of social mobility that people are here. Those who can't make it in the city are sent to live here or end up living here.
I know that you spent quite a long time getting to know the inhabitants of the Deonar garbage mountains, and I'm interested on the impact on you of knowing these people. Were there important lessons you learned from them about the meaning of life?
Certainly, I've known them for about 8 years, and I've seen them going through so much. And I was talking to, one of the main characters in the book is Farzana, and I was talking to her father, Haider Ali, the other day, and we were just discussing how courageous his daughter is. That she wears it lightly. She'll just shrug her shoulders and say, well, what else could I do? But there's so many occasions that I felt that if I was in her place, I would just want to curl up in bed and not get up for the rest of my life. And yet she's constantly pushing herself to walk, to move ahead, to get married, to be with someone, to have children, to work, propelling herself towards that life that she wants to have, rather than just one that she was probably destined for, or that even I thought at one point that she was destined for it. For difficulties, for disabilities, for so many not nice things. And yet she has propelled herself into a somewhat happier life.
Well, what the book really brought home to me was that when you have nothing, you know that true value comes from the love of a family and community.
Yes, absolutely. One would think, you see 16, this is a question that came to me constantly when you walk the mountains and you see there's 16 million metric tons of trash lying there, which is basically things that we thought give meaning to our life. Shoes, we buy clothes, we buy nice food, dessert, thinking, okay, this is going to make me somehow happy or satiate me. And yet it ends up here and we remain empty. So does that sort of, the lack of a better word, material wealth or material desire make us happier is a question. I mean, maybe not. And the lack of having anything, does that make relationships also weaker? Does that make us morally compromised? Sometimes, and I have shown that on some occasions that complete poverty and desperation has made them do not nice things, including, I've not flinched away from that. I have shown that there are instances where they've abandoned their families, done kidnapping, crime, that does happen. But on many occasions, in spite of the lack of wealth, there is also this tremendous bonds of family, of love, that bind they would go to any extent. They don't have any money, but they will go to any extent to protect their children, their loved ones. That often made me wonder that maybe wealthy people wouldn't do that. And that while I wouldn't necessarily say that they're directly proportional, that only poor people have close bonds with family, but certainly I did see tremendous bonds of love and family. And you see people going above and beyond. When they don't have money, they're literally putting their bodies on line to protect their family.
Yeah, that's very true. Now, your book is nonfiction, so we know that the characters in your book are real people. We get to meet 4 families, but the main focus of the book is a girl by the name of Farzana. What made you to decide to center the book on her life story?
Actually, all the 4 families were equally reported. I must admit that at different points, they've all been the main characters of the book. But then in 2016, so many things began happening to Farzana that it became clear to me that, she was glowing through the drafts, really. I avoided writing about her for a while because it was traumatic for me to ask, traumatic for her to tell. And so I must tell you, we have spent months just together, but not talking. Once I was on her way to her house, and so many times actually, I was on my way to her house, and she said she didn't want to meet me because I kept asking her the same questions, difficult questions, traumatic questions. She didn't want to recall them. And so I remember once I had bought her ice cream, and I went back home with melted ice cream, not having met her, having come back halfway. But at some point, she realized, without my pushing, that this had to be told, that I was not going anywhere. And so sometimes in the least expected ways, she would tell me, do you know, that day I have a very clear memory of it. That day, I remember what I was wearing. I had full consciousness. I have full memory. Here's what I was saying at that time. And here's how my brother soothed me. Here's what my brother said to me. It was dialogue was coming out, clothes, that visual memory, oral memory. She had everything. It's just that she didn't, it was difficult for her to confront and deal with, and difficult for me to ask and to channel through my hands.
I found your writing style fascinating, Saumya. The book is nonfiction, but it reads like a novel, and it's obviously very well researched. And I'm wondering whether the fact that you're a journalist and not a novelist is the reason you have such a unique writing style.
I don't know where it comes from. Thank you for saying that. I may not be the best person to tell you where it comes from, because it was almost unconsciously. I just stayed true to the material, and what came. The only thing I can tell you is that I had left journalism and stopped writing for 6 or 7 years, and then came back to it with little bits of research, adding up to make this story. So I should, maybe what I should say is that the story was also stuck in me. I was also addicted to this story. And journalism, what happens is that we have the harness of structure. Your story is only so long, you need not go deeper. But with a book, you can write as long as you want. And so you cannot stop researching. And I too was addicted, and I could not stop researching. I went down crazy rabbit holes.
Well, the impression I got from your book is that people who live at the Deonar garbage site really believe that they will find something valuable, like a huge diamond or an emerald, that they will be able to sell and make a lot of money and get out of there. Did you ever meet anyone who actually had that kind of luck?
No. I actually met these people as, I first met them as a microfinance lender, a non-profit microfinance lender. And so it was their finances, their upward mobility, their businesses that concerned me at first. And all of them would tell me they knew somebody who had found gold, somebody who had found diamonds. Bombay has a huge diamond market. About 90-95% of the world's diamonds are polished here. And so they would tell me, oh, diamond dust is lying around in the garbage somewhere. And, emerald, there's a palm-sized emerald that somebody found, and somebody moved out, but it was never them. It was never them. So it was probably like an urban legend, that hope that kept them going, that ephemeral hope that kept them going for generations. Some of these people are second, third generation waste pickers, still hoping to find that treasure.
In that way, they're not wrong for many of us, right?
Exactly.
We're all hoping to find that big gold ring.
Yeah, exactly.
Tell us about the court proceedings to try to close this garbage site. The case seems to be going on forever.
Yeah, 26 years. So as I said, I had no background in the law or in any particular interest in law, except that the waste pickers would tell me sometimes that there's been a case going on for a long time to close the dumping ground. And then in 2017, there was a court judgment that said all construction that added space in the city was banned. And that's when I began going to court, and I became fascinated immediately, because it seemed that this intractable problem was at the edge of being resolved. And so I attended 200-300 hours of proceedings, and also went through a long protracted process to get documents for the previous 22 years of the case proceedings. And it was the same. It seemed as if it had been at the verge of movement, at the verge of closing down, but had not yet closed down.
So you've attended 300 hours of court proceedings. Can I assume that you don't have a very good impression of the court system in India?
No, I actually have a great impression of the court system, because I was very fascinated by Justice Abhay Oak, who was the presiding judge at the time when I attended court hearings. Just a couple of weeks ago, he was actually elevated to the Supreme Court of India. He was an extremely idealistic, well-meaning judge. I could make out that he was trying to do something. And yet the administrative tangles, legal tangles were so immense that there has been some movement, but even today dumping is going on and the court case is going on. Harvey, I know you have been concerned with access to justice and spoken about it so beautifully. And I have just a couple of lines from my book which talk about access to justice that I just quickly wanted to read out to you, if that's okay with you.
Yes, please.
Also, while speaking to young students, Justice Oak says, when you connect with such litigants, you learn what life is about. After becoming a judge, I realized the real challenge before our legal system is not docket explosion, but of docket exclusion. He went on, there are certain deficiencies in our legal system that large sections of our population silently suffer injustice. While the unending pile of pending cases clogging Indian courts had often been spoken about, Justice Oak suggested the bigger problem was that people like Farzana and the inhabitants of Karwale remained invisible to the courts that decided their fate. And I think it speaks to your concern with access to justice and your years long advocacy for better access to justice also. And that is what I saw in court.
That was a very eloquent expression of the realities of the justice system for many people.
But what I will say is that the courtroom provided me an opportunity. While this is a very micro look at the garbage dump, he was presiding over cases on noise pollution, on air pollution. So just to see how this was also a larger story for development in, at least in my country, but possibly in yours too, or all over the world, about you can pass any order, but implementing the order is a whole other thing. What happens on the ground is a whole other thing. And also in court, that feeling of movement, but it's at the trembling almost, but not completely coming, not coming in full measure. Development, movement, the going of noise pollution, air pollution, the garbage dumps, all of it is like almost improving, but not improving.
Saumya, you wrote that you came to see the mountains, and I'm going to quote you here, as an outpouring of our modern lives, of the endless chase for our desires to fill us. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, many times when I walked the garbage dump, I walked by myself, and I would just see things that had probably been sent from the city, like high-heeled shoes. I myself may have on occasion bought them to feel they filled something in me, some kind of desire in me. Cell phones, lots of cell phones. That people felt that just this new model would make them a new person, a shiny new person, make them more desirable, make them cooler. So lots of things that I thought made people feel better about themselves, about their self-image, and also how they appear to others. When you're carrying a new model of phone, people think you're cooler than, suddenly that you've become cooler. And yet in 2 months, as you know, phones get outdated. India is the world's fastest growing cell phone market and the world's second largest smartphone market. And so you can imagine phones are getting outdated every 2 months, landing up there on the garbage dump. And so what does that mean for that self-image that you had when you were carrying that new phone? You don't want that old phone anymore. You want the new phone. And then you feel that will douse you. Somewhere else, I have a line that says aspiration, loneliness, everything was to be doused with things.
Yeah, I really understand that. In a way, you can tell a lot about a society by what they throw away. And as I was reading the book and getting deeper into it, I realized there was a theme here about urban overconsumption, excessive consumerism, planned obsolescence. We're living in this throwaway society without any concern for the environmental and the health implications of what that's doing to society. And then you've got these waste pickers there, living there, having to deal with the consequences of our over-consumerism.
Yes, absolutely. There were so many times I've watched them I was watching almost like an anthropological experiment. What were they bringing back? And to me, it was a reflection of our society. So many times it was, say, a collection of ripped jeans that we may have thrown away for being a bit too ripped. And they were patching it up and reselling it in the second-hand market. I have a photograph of a little girl who had found a palette of blush on makeup, and she was, very carefully applying it on her cheek. So they are the end of that funnel of our consumption. New kinds of foods, takeaway foods, foil boxes full of foods that were never seen before, but that were now there, and they could not understand. You mean to say this cup had coffee that was for like 200 rupees? I cannot imagine that. So it gave me an almost inverted view of the city and of our lives that had made these lives.
What does your book tell us about life in India?
I mean, I would say that it tells us something about life everywhere. In the environmental movement, this is called "Not in My Backyard," but I would say, in a somewhat more philosophical sense, that the way that we hoard things, thinking that they provide some kind of meaning in our life, and then send them away, thinking that they're invisible, but that nothing really goes away. It's there. Typically, people think that, oh, this waste is going into oceans, and oh, some fish are eating it, or oysters are strangling on it or something. But there are people. I think that this provided an opportunity to show that there are people whose lives are made of this, that our overconsumption is also creating these lives. And so what we use and what we throw away defines us. And what we throw away also, we feel that this no more makes us cool, and so we need to just throw it away. But so therefore that also, we think, defines us. What we throw away also in a way defines us. And so that then begs the question that what gives meaning to our life? Is it things? Is it relationships? And then to build and rebuild our lives when we, through that conversation of what defines us, what doesn't define us, what gives meaning to our life. I think that's a conversation that I would hope my book does encourage among readers.
Saumya, you received grants from the Rockefeller Foundation's Bellagio Center and the Carey Institute for Global Good to help you research the book. And it's clear that you wrote the book to shine a light on the appalling conditions that these people are living in. What are you hoping that the book will achieve?
I grew up as a reader. I grew up reading a lot, actually, and so I hope that it's that it moves readers more than anything else. I hope that it moves readers. It takes them into this world that is a fully created world, where there are also birthday parties and teenage romances and joy. There is like sunlight and rain and the works. And when you emerge from that world, you realize that, yeah, okay, there's something for me to think about. And you are a little bit changed, a little bit transformed.
What's been the reaction to the book in India?
It's been a good reaction. People, I think in India, certainly there's a growing realization of landfills and waste and pollution. I think this concern with air pollution has been growing over the last few years. I also talk in the book about how in this budget in March, the government announced a $40 billion plan to mitigate air pollution and garbage mountains like this one. So I do hope that this is going to shrink very soon.
Would you like to see the book made into a movie?
Actually, if you ask me honestly, I would love to see the court sections made into a movie also, apart from the lives of the Wastepickers, because I saw such wonderful, amazing drama in the courts. And there's a very famous movie set in Bombay, made in Marathi, called Court, which when I was walking the corridors of the courtroom, I felt like I was in a real life version of the movie. So I would love to see it, yes, as a movie, both regarding the Wastepickers and the garbage mountains and also about court proceedings.
Well, if it's going to be about the court proceedings, it better be a mini series because it's likely going to take more than 2 hours for a movie.
And also all the different, my concern was the garbage mountains, but there's so many amazing, interesting cases that I know you've dealt with, and you yourself have been so concerned with access to justice, which is also what the court case was showing, that while their fates were being adjudicated in court, they were nowhere there.
I know. From the research you've done, is the situation at the Deonar garbage mountains unique, or are there other places in the world where people live at garbage landfill sites?
Actually, while I was even researching this book, there was a garbage landslide at Addis Ababa, and I think more than 100 people had died. There was a garbage landslide in Colombo, and certainly people were injured, and I don't remember if they died or not. So this is not unusual by any means. It may or may not be a somewhat heightened version of what happens elsewhere, but it's not unusual at all. In Manila, Smoky Mountain in Manila was actually one of the best known garbage mountains, and there were waste pickers who lived there. There were all kinds of accidents there with regard to waste pickers. So this is not unusual. And even in the developed world, while you don't see waste pickers, you certainly see waste mounting as a huge problem. How do we deal with this? Where do we send it? There's a very famous case in New York City itself, where once waste was put on a barge to be sent away for disposal, but nobody would accept it. And so the barge stayed floating off New York City for, I think, weeks or months. And it felt like an urban legend to me until I actually spoke to the person who said it was true, and she had dealt with it.
Yes, it is true. It's very well known. Now, Saumya, you're living in Mumbai and you're a journalist and an activist. Can you tell us about your activism and your future plans?
So I would say I'm a social entrepreneur. I run Vandana Foundation. We work on livelihood related projects, which is microfinance, etc. in Mumbai, but also in the rural areas of our state, where we work with farmers, widows of farmers who committed suicide. So we give them low interest loans to grow their businesses, to do some hand woven cloth that we make into shirts and sell. So different things like that. And I actually also intend to continue writing about this. I am writing a few journalistic pieces related to my research on waste and landfills. And I would love to continue doing that.
Well, that's wonderful. I can't wait to read what you write next. I'm just so happy that your publisher reached out to me about your book so that I could utilize my platform to bring attention to it. Thank you so much, Saumya, for coming on our show.
Thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure and an honor.
Our guest has been journalist, author, and activist Saumya Roy. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you to our producer, Steve Silver. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time.
Remember to subscribe to the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. And be sure to check out more great interviews with Harvey Brownstone on harveybrownstoneinterviews.com.